Hello, everyone. I hope that you're doing well. We're now in week 6, which means that we are halfway through the term. So thank you for all of your hard work, thoughtful engagement, and ideas presented in the class so far. Let's go ahead and get started on the content from this week. So this week, we are going to be talking about the Health and Science Disparities essay. This assignment is due by this Sunday, and I want to provide just a couple of pointers and things to know as you're preparing to work on this in lieu of a weekly Canvas activity. And then this week, we'll be talking about the topic of caregiving, including some key ideas, concepts, and things to know related to caregiving more generally. So to get us started, by this Sunday, you will be turning in your Health and Science Disparities essay, which is a larger assignment that you'll be doing instead of a Canvas prompt. And as mentioned a bit in weeks past, you're picking a health and science topic that is disproportionately impacting a particular population or demographic. For example, it could be mental health support impacting veterans, such as PTSD. It could be diagnoses of mental and behavioral health related issues facing BIPOC populations. It could be discussing HIV/AIDS in the context of the LGBTQ+ community. So there's a variety of options that you might consider. And I encourage you to reach out to me if you're in need of additional ideas or how to hone this down a little bit further. So it's 3 to 4 pages, double spaced. Make sure that you are including both in-text citations and a works cited list to talk about how communication about health and science has impacted this population and strategies that could be used to best support and lift up a population who's disproportionately impacted by an issue. And of course, I'm asking to include at least 2 outside scholarly sources. You're welcome to pick among sources that you might have included in your annotated bibliography, or to select completely different sources that you're interested in that would be relevant. By the end of the day today, I'd request if you need an extension to reach out to me about that. Otherwise, it is due on the 14th. You're welcome to send me an optional rough draft or outline, or if you're in need of help or possible ideas, let me know. Just make sure to get that material to me by Friday to make sure that I have enough time to turn around that feedback or rough draft to you. Again, I'm here to help you, and I do my best to respond as quickly as I can. So the sooner you send me any sort of update or need help, the better that I can help you. And as you're thinking about your topic and exploring this issue, you might think about, first of all, who is a population that's relevant to you, either in terms of your own background and experiences, or perhaps your professional path, your connections, and people that you work and network with. Second of all, what is an issue related to health that's disproportionately impacting that population? And lastly, what are some steps that you think might be good to address that issue? So I encourage you to think about some of these ideas further. And again, I'm available as a resource to help you, and I look forward to seeing what you put together. All right, so with that being said, let's go ahead and get into the topic of caregiving that in many ways is relevant to issues of health and science disparities. Caregiving specifically is about how we provide social and health needs to other people, particularly in the context of things such as hospice, end-of-life care, or recovery. Caregiving is something that is, of course, communicated. We use verbal and nonverbal communication as a means of providing care and support, and it's crucial. It's not just the communication that's happening in doctor's office, but it's also the social support, the family support, and the connections that individuals have, particularly as they're working through a difficult diagnosis or health issue. So, the majority, of course, of conversations about health are ones that are not happening in the doctor's office. They're family members and friends expressing concern, checking in about somebody's health and dietary habits, seeing if they're doing okay. So a lot of the way that we experience and talk about health is in those social settings, and oftentimes they can have a more persuasive impact on us than visiting the doctor. According to the buffering hypothesis, it suggests that our social support is usually the most important if we're dealing with stressful experiences and others are able to buffer or provide support. For example, we're dealing with a difficult diagnosis, such as being diagnosed as diabetic, and dealing with a family member who's also diabetic who can help to explain and map out the steps that can be used to address them. And what's known as the direct or main effect model is a model that suggests that having social support is useful even if we don't have notable stressors. In other words, if we're healthy, if we're feeling good, we still benefit from having social connections, particularly insofar as they're there in case things do take a turn, particularly if we're waiting for something like a test result. When it comes to coping, right? Coping, of course, involves the strategy of dealing with and navigating a difficult situation, diagnosis, care, or a major injury or challenge. One example in thinking about coping in the recovery process in popular media, as you might be familiar with actor Jeremy Renner, who recently had a snowmobile accident and has had very severe injuries. And he's been very public about his recovering and coping process from that event, showing us kind of the practice of coping and dealing with coping in media. So the way that we can best cope is oftentimes to keep busy and to stay occupied. We oftentimes find ourselves getting lost in our thoughts if we don't have the support and networking, and we tend to be more likely to stew in those thoughts if we're lacking the support that we need. Two models that I think are good to contrast in this is the idea of the internal locus of control, that we are agentically in charge of our own lives and our destiny. That is, we can make decisions to promote our own health and well-being. Whereas an external locus of control suggests that issues are outside of our control, right? We don't have the ability to make good decisions about health, or all of those factors are existing outside of us, which is something that happens in coping. Is we tend to see more external locus. We can't control our decisions about our health. They're coming from outside forces. So coping is a process of recognizing what we can and can't control. Coping can use action facilitating, where we seek out tasks and information that provides us with more context and support, along with nurturing, where we're building compassion and social support with other people. So we can both better understand the health or social issue that we're navigating, and we can also understand how we can engage with other people effectively. Sometimes we encounter what's known as a crisis, right? This might be a health episode or concern that goes beyond somebody's coping ability, that can, of course, lead to some major social and psychological impacts. Whereas normalcy is the feeling, particularly with coping, that somebody's condition is manageable and under control. So one challenge in coping is the feeling of control and losing control over one's body, feeling not in control of one's health and supporting one's health, and having crises that can lead to that issue. So establishing a sense of normalcy is crucial in the coping process. As a part of this, it's important to recognize some of the ways that we can provide support through the use of communication. One of them is involving tasks and favors, for example, fetching somebody a glass of water through instrumental support. Informational support, which means helping to make decisions and provide context. For instance, trying to decide whether or not to undergo chemotherapy is providing informational support. And helping somebody feel valued and competent is esteem support, making that person aware that it's ultimately their decisions about their health and that you're there to support them every step of the way. Oftentimes, the use of humor and levity is a great way to provide esteem support and make people feel like they're able to help each other as they're working through a difficult situation. Supportive listening should be about the other person, right? Focusing on their feelings, staying neutral, summarizing or paraphrasing to show your understanding of what they have to say, and really showing that you understand what's on their mind and are available to help them out, rather than making it about yourself. Emotional support, meanwhile, is about understanding and acknowledging what it is that somebody's feeling. Again, finding the space to empathize with things that might be similar, but also to create distance and recognize that somebody is going through a unique set of challenges that perhaps it's insensitive for you to say that you fully understand. Support groups, so those can be common. You might be familiar with AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, or mental health, counseling-related support groups. That can be a really useful way for people to go around and share their experiences, particularly in dealing with a difficult issue. But one challenge in a lot of support groups is that they can create a sort of us versus them, where the group becomes very close and tight-knit, but they become a little bit antagonistic toward outside forces. Again, not to discredit the power and significance of support groups. They're great, just to recognize that there are some communication patterns that can emerge in how support groups choose to communicate about others. So there are also some challenges that come with the ways in which we provide support and assistance to others. One of them is the idea of providing over support. It's providing help in a way that's considered to be unnecessary or excessive. One example of this is someone in a wheelchair who really desires to open a door for themselves, and the door is open for them and they don't have the ability to make that decision. Even if it's well-intentioned, oftentimes somebody wants to make that decision, right? Providing too much assistance in a way that seems like it's demeaning or discrediting someone. There's also the idea of over-informing, right? Providing too much information, especially if it's sensitive or could have a really big impact on somebody. It's important to be careful about how you roll out and share information that could be having a really big impact on someone. And then there's also the idea of over-empathizing or providing emotional contagion, where you actually experience somebody's emotions to such an extent that you're feeling them too, and you're feeling upset because someone else is upset. And sometimes that can create a feedback loop, because somebody says, well, I'm sad because you're sad. Well, I'm sad because I made you sad, right? So it can be a challenge to over empathize with somebody. It's important to still create some level of distance so that the patient doesn't feel that they're burdened by the idea of them sharing their challenges and experiences with them. So it's a difficult line to walk. When it comes to support in family contexts, it's important to show that empathic concern that you understand and acknowledge the experiences that somebody else is going through, right? Oftentimes, especially in difficult health situations, we worry about saying the right thing, right? We want to get it right. We want to say the things that will help somebody in dealing with a difficult situation. But in that process, we oftentimes are afraid and we don't say anything at all. So one challenge is forgetting about finding the perfect words, right? You're not going to say the right thing, but it's better to say something and to try and to show your concern, even if it doesn't come out the best way. And sometimes you can have what's known as a transcendent experience, where the amount of support and assistance you receive is so good that it changes your experience about a health-related issue, and you really feel through that positive encounter like you're able to improve. So we'll talk a little bit more about policy next week, but there are some things that I think are relevant to know as it relates to caregiving. You might be familiar with the very well-known and publicized case of Terri Schiavo, who under the George W. Bush administration, it was a case in which there was a woman who debatably was in a largely vegetative state, and a question as to whether or not the family should end Schiavo's life or continue, especially without full advanced care directive information, and debates as to what she would have wanted if she was able to speak and communicate. Speaking to some of the challenges of caregiving and the national level attention some of these issues have gained. So caregiving in family contexts is a major industry. The Family and Medical Leave Act of 1993 guarantees that 12 weeks off work can be taken for caring for ailing family, medical care, or new children. And oftentimes a family caregiver feels unprepared. A few years ago, I had a parent who my sister and I provided hospice and end-of-life care, and it's challenging. It's difficult to deal with the sort of constant need for support, and also to see a loved one in a very different capacity. So that can be a big challenge, right? The case of my dad, right? Going from somebody that I, talked to a lot and looked up to a lot to changing his diapers for him was a very difficult transition. So oftentimes family caregivers are put in a difficult spot. Death with dignity is the idea of, in the process of hospice care, providing the support, keeping somebody comfortable, allowing them to experience life in the means of which they so choose as they are transitioning out of their lives. Slow medicine, right? Showing kindness and listening, especially in these contexts, is important. And as mentioned, an advanced care directive is an important way to explain if somebody is too ill to communicate what they want done. So this is a way to prevent a situation like this one, where there is a lot of family strain and dispute as to what should be done about someone who has not communicated if they would want to continue to have this kind of care. One of the last things that I think is important is thinking about from the perspective of a provider or caregiver, some of the ways to communicate effectively about bad news, right? Sharing a diagnosis or sharing some health information that is, very difficult for the person with whom you're speaking. So there's a variety of strategies. Caring relationships from the beginning, you've been supportive and you've developed rapport. Foreshadowing, right? Kind of making it clear through the tone in the beginning that you should be bracing for difficult news. Inviting others who might be relevant and supportive to, help that person as they're processing that bad news. Doing so in a private way, so it's not considered invasive or public. Being really clear, again, not beating around the bush or using euphemisms, but really being clear as to what the thing is. And as part of that, right, avoiding jargon, recognizing the emotions that somebody is going through and taking cues from the person and how they're reacting, giving them time if they're bursting into tears. Showing your care and empathy for that other person, again, acknowledging that they're in a difficult spot. This is a very hard part of being a healthcare provider, right? Is having to deal with sharing that bad news. Recognizing that people are coming from different cultural and social backgrounds and might react differently. Providing support where needed, and helping people with planning their next steps. So what needs to be done in providing this family member with care, or what can we do and what options can we have for you to help you as you're working through this issue. So these are some steps that generally have been seen as effective in dealing with some of these challenges. So to recap some of the key ideas we went over, so your health and science disparities essay is due on Sunday. We talked about caregiving and the effective communication both in and out of healthcare settings, and the idea that effective caregiving communication can drastically improve one's experience and allow our communication to be more sensitive, supportive, and attentive to the needs of people who are oftentimes dealing with a very difficult situation in their lives. Next week, we will discuss issues in health and science policy, kind of applying it to current events and understanding the current health landscape. So look forward to that. Have a great rest of your week. I look forward to checking out your health and science disparities essays, and have a good one, and hopefully enjoy the improving weather wherever you may be.